morning was damp and gray, the kind of quiet that settles deep into your bones. At 77, I'd grown used to that kind of silence. Not the peaceful kind, the empty kind. The kind that reminds you how long it's been since you heard your name spoken with real affection. I lived alone in the same two-story house Miriam and I bought back in 1983, a white cottage overlooking the bay in Henlopen Acres. Back then, it felt like the start of forever. Now it felt like the end of something. The wood creaked a little louder these days. The floors seemed colder. But I kept it going. I swept the porch. I made oatmeal every morning. I still folded the laundry the way Miriam liked it, even though no one else would see it. That day began like every other. I was pouring oats into a pot, stirring slowly while the local news mumbled in the background, when I heard the sound that told me something was wrong, the sharp crunch of tires on gravel. I wiped my hands and moved to the window. A silver SUV rolled into the driveway like it owned the place. Ingram's SUV. My son. My gut tightened. He never came unannounced, and certainly not this early. It was 7:15 in the morning. I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch in my robe, squinting through the fog. 4 car doors popped open like a synchronized insult. Ingram stepped out first, phone in hand, glancing around like he was casing the place. Beatrix climbed out after him, all sunglasses and polished leather. She looked like someone who didn't like to get her heels dusty. Then came the kids. Terrence, earbuds in, dragging 2 suitcases, and Alwyn, glued to her phone, barely aware of where she was. It wasn't the people that made me uneasy. It was the luggage. 7 bags, maybe 8, the kind of packing you do when you're not just visiting. I pointed at the trunk. "What's with all the bags?" Ingram offered a thin smile and said, "We thought we'd come to visit." Beatrix didn't even look at me. She was already motioning to Terrence. "Get the green one too, it has the linens." Ingram walked up the steps and gave me a pat on the shoulder. "Just for a couple weeks, Dad. Maybe a month. We talked about it. Remember? Renovations." "No," I said flatly. "I don't remember." "Must have slipped my mind," he said, brushing past me like the decision was already made. Terrence muttered, "Hey, Grandpa," on his way in. Alwyn gave me a half smile and ducked her head. The front door closed behind them. Just like that, my house, my peace, was gone. I stood there for a long time, still in my robe, staring out at the bay and trying to understand what had just happened. This wasn't a visit. This was an occupation. When I finally went back inside, I found Beatrix already in my kitchen. She was throwing out food from my fridge like it was garbage. "Obadiah, this cheese expired 3 days ago," she said, holding it out like it might explode. "And this sausage, full of nitrates, dangerous at your age." I watched in silence as she tossed everything into the trash. Food I'd eaten for years. Meals Miriam used to make for me. Gone in seconds. Ingram appeared in the hallway, on another call, pointing into different rooms like he was giving a tour. "Papa," he said, reappearing in the kitchen. "Beatrix and I will take the master bedroom. You'll be more comfortable on the first floor. No stairs to worry about." I looked at him stunned. "I take the stairs every day," I replied. "It's good for my knees." Beatrix stepped forward with that smile. The one she uses when she wants to seem kind but isn't. "You're 77. What if you fall at night?" "I have a bathroom upstairs," I said, "and I've never fallen." "There's a first time for everything," she said sweetly. Then she turned to Ingram. "Tell your father we're just concerned." Ingram gave me that look, the one I'd come to recognize. A look that said he was already tired of explaining things to me. "Dad, come on. It's just for a few weeks. The downstairs room is cozy." That word, cozy. A polite way of saying small, forgotten, and out of the way. I could have argued, but I didn't. I nodded once and went upstairs to pack my things. It wasn't the moving that was hard. It was what I had to leave behind. Miriam's books, her slippers still tucked beneath the bed. The photograph from our 40th anniversary. Her hairbrush still holding strands of gray hair I couldn't bear to throw away. Everything in that room had a memory, and I touched each one like it might dissolve if I let go too soon. By the time I moved downstairs, the house no longer felt like mine. It was clean, sterile, rearranged. That evening, we sat around the dinner table. Or rather, I sat at the end of it while they talked over me. Beatrix had cooked something vegan, lentils and kale. Terrence was texting the entire time. Alwyn barely touched her food. Ingram and Beatrix were discussing paint samples. We'll repaint the kitchen, she said, something more modern. Light gray, maybe a mint trim. That yellow was Miriam's favorite, I said. She picked it. That was 30 years ago, Obadiah, Beatrix replied. Nobody paints kitchens yellow anymore. I looked around the room. My kitchen. My memories. My home. It didn't matter anymore. They had already decided. Later that night, in the narrow bed of the downstairs guest room, I pulled out the photo of Miriam that I kept in my wallet. Her smile still felt warm, even on the coldest days. I held it to my chest and whispered, "What would you do if you were me?" But she didn't answer. The only sound was the muffled laughter of strangers in my living room. By morning, it was no longer a question of whether they were staying. It was clear they'd moved in. I woke up to the clatter of pans in the kitchen, not the comforting sound of breakfast being made by someone who loved you, but the intrusive clang of someone reorganizing what wasn't theirs. Beatrix was moving things. She had taken every item out of the spice rack and lined them up on the counter like specks in a police lineup. Too much salt, too much sugar, too much fat, she muttered. No wonder your blood pressure's up. She hadn't asked about my blood pressure, she just assumed, like she assumed everything now belonged to her. I stepped into the room and watched as she dumped my cinnamon sticks into the trash. Those were Miriam's, I said quietly. She didn't even look up. They were expired. Besides, you don't need that stuff anymore. Then came the clatter of glass, my tea mugs being moved to a lower shelf so she could place her matching porcelain set in their place. We'll need a better system if we're going to be here a while. That was the first time she said it out loud. We're going to be here a while. Not visiting, not just for a couple weeks. A while. The rest of the house wasn't faring much better. Ingram had taken to pacing the upstairs hallway, phone pressed to his ear, talking to contractors like he already owned the deed. "Yeah, we'll knock out that wall," I heard him say. "Open it up a bit, modernize the flow." I stayed behind the door of the guest room, listening. This wasn't their house, but it wasn't mine anymore either. Not in the way that mattered. That afternoon, I walked into the living room and stopped cold. My photos were gone. All of them. The pictures of Miriam and me on vacation, the framed photo of Ingram as a boy holding his first fishing rod, even the group family photo we took the year Miriam passed. All of it had vanished from the mantel. In their place were abstract sculptures, metallic candle holders, and a hideous bowl filled with decorative rocks. I stood there blinking, like maybe I was imagining it. But no, it was real. Beatrix had redecorated, without asking, without saying a word. I found the box of photos in the hallway closet next to the vacuum. "Did you move these?" I asked. Beatrix was peeling an avocado in the kitchen. "They didn't match the new look," she said. "Besides, they were gathering dust." I stared at her. "They're my life." She didn't even pause. "Well, your life is cluttering the house." That night, I tried to eat in silence, but it was impossible. Terrence was blasting music upstairs, something with a deep bass that shook the walls. Alwyn was sitting across the table, earbuds in, scrolling through her phone like she couldn't be bothered to exist in the same moment as the rest of us. "So," I said finally, trying to make conversation. "Alwyn, how's school?" She looked up, clearly startled that I'd spoken. "It's fine." "Any thoughts on what you want to major in?" She shrugged. "I'll figure it out." Then she stood and walked off with her plate, leaving a trail of quinoa behind her. I turned to Ingram. "Do they always talk like that?" He didn't even look up from his laptop. "It's just how kids are these days, Dad. Don't take it personally." I looked at him for a long moment, then rose from the table and went to load the dishwasher. As I was rinsing a plate, Beatrix came up behind me. "No, no," she said, taking it from my hands. "You're doing it wrong. You have to pre-rinse, or the machine gets clogged." "I've had this dishwasher for 15 years, I replied, my voice tight. "It's never clogged once." She turned to Ingram without missing a beat. "Tell your father he's going to ruin the appliance." Ingram didn't look up. "Dad, please, just let her handle it." So I let go of the plate. I walked back to my room, my guest room, my exile. I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed with the photograph of Miriam in my lap. I stared at her face, the way she always seemed like she knew what was coming, even when she didn't say it. "They've moved in, Miriam," I whispered. "They've taken it all. Your kitchen, your paintings, even your coffee mugs. They don't see me. I'm just in the way. The next morning brought more changes. The thermostat had been reprogrammed. The kitchen clock was replaced. My vinyl records had disappeared from the cabinet in the living room. When I asked where they were, Beatrix said, "Oh, that junk? I boxed them up. They're in the garage. No one listens to records anymore." I wanted to scream. Instead, I walked to the garage. I found the box shoved between the lawn chairs and a half-used can of paint. Some of the sleeves were bent. One was torn. My first pressing of Kind of Blue by Miles Davis, folded at the corner like it was a leftover pizza box. I picked them up and carried them back to my room, placing them under the bed like forbidden contraband. And that's when it hit me. I was being slowly removed from my own life. Not violently, not loudly, quietly, softly, with polite phrases and suggestions. A shelf moved here, a chair replaced there, a memory boxed up and taken to the garage. I wasn't living with them, they were living instead of me. Later that evening, I stood on the porch, looking out at the bay, and wondered if ghosts felt like this. Present, but ignored. Visible, but fading. And for the first time in a very long while, I felt something I hadn't felt since Miriam died. Alone. But not just alone. Unwanted. It started with a coffee mug. My favorite one. Navy blue, chipped on the handle, with "World's Best Husband" printed on the side in fading white letters. Miriam gave it to me on our 25th anniversary. I drank from it every morning since. One day it was on the kitchen shelf. The next day it wasn't. I searched every cupboard, every cabinet. I finally found it in the trash, broken in two. "It fell?" Beatrix said without a trace of apology. Besides, it was old. She was slicing papaya with surgical precision, her voice calm, her tone final. I stared at the two halves of the cup resting on top of an empty yogurt container like a tombstone. That was the first thing she broke, but it wasn't the last. A few days later, I discovered my photo albums were missing. The ones Miriam and I filled over decades. Vacations, birthdays, Sunday picnics by the lighthouse, baby pictures of Ingram, letters tucked between the pages. All gone. I found the albums in the outdoor trash bin, buried under cardboard and grapefruit peels. "Why would you throw these away?" I asked, holding one of the soaked covers in disbelief. Beatrix didn't even look up from her tablet. "They were taking up too much space, and they're all digitizable anyway. It's the 21st century, Obadiah." I carried the damp albums back to my room like they were wounded animals, laid them out across the bed. Some pages were already warped, ink running in small waves. I sat there for hours with a towel, trying to dry what I could. As I dabbed at the water stains on a photo of Miriam holding newborn Ingram, something inside me cracked, silent but deep. I wasn't just losing space, I was losing my history. One discarded photo at a time. The next day, the hallway bookshelf was bare. Dozens of books I had collected. History, philosophy, old paperbacks with my notes scribbled in the margins, all packed into boxes and shoved into the garage without asking. I confronted Ingram, who was standing by the back door tying his sneakers. "What happened to my books?" I asked. He glanced up, half annoyed. "Mom said they were collecting dust, were reorganizing." "They were my books," I said. "Mine. You didn't even ask." "Dad," he said, standing tall like he was the parent now, "the house is too cluttered. You can't keep everything forever." He didn't realize the irony, that I wasn't asking to keep everything, just the few things that still reminded me of a life I lived before all of them arrived. But it wasn't about space. It was about erasure. Every photo removed, every object replaced, every voice that talked over mine. It all sent the same message. You don't belong here anymore. That night, I sat on the porch with the last bottle of port Miriam had bought before she died. I'd been saving it for something, not an occasion, just a moment. I poured a glass, watched the sunset bleed into the bay, and tried to pretend she was still beside me. I missed her terribly. Not just the woman she was, but the balance she brought to everything. She wouldn't have let any of this happen. She would have stood between me and the slow dismantling of my dignity and said, "No, not him. Not like this." I didn't sleep much after that. Some nights I'd hear laughter upstairs. Beatrix on the phone with her mother, cackling about the old man's mustard curtains, or how quaint the downstairs room was. Other nights, it was the clink of wine glasses, the scrape of Ingram's voice planning some renovation or budget or investment idea. Not once did they knock on my door. Not once did they ask how I was sleeping, or if I needed anything. Alwyn passed me in the hall once with her earbuds in. I stopped her and asked if she wanted help with her college application essay. "I was an English teacher," I said gently. "I might have a few tricks left." She smiled, polite but hollow. "Thanks, Grandpa, but I'm just using Google." She disappeared into her room before I could say another word. One morning I noticed something odd. My recliner, the brown leather one I'd had since the early 90s, was gone from the living room. In its place was a gray modular piece that looked like it belonged in a furniture catalog, not a home. I walked into the garage and found the recliner wedged between the leaf blower and a stack of paint cans. The arms were scratched. The cushion had dust on it. "Why did you move my chair?" I asked Ingram later that evening. He didn't even stop buttering his toast. It clashed with the color scheme. "We're going for a more minimalist look." I could have said something clever, could have raised my voice, but what would be the point? They didn't listen. They tolerated me the way people tolerate a porch light flickering at night, mildly annoying, mostly irrelevant, and bound to burn out eventually. That weekend, Terrence threw a party. Not a loud one, just a few friends. I heard the beer bottles clinking in the recycling bin afterward. The sound of laughter that wasn't mine. I wasn't invited. I wasn't even acknowledged. My house, the one I had worked for my entire life, had become a dormitory for people who no longer saw me as family, just as the man who came with the deed. I sat in my room that night, with the door closed, the record player turned low, spinning Ella Fitzgerald. I held one of Miriam's sweaters in my lap, soft blue wool, still faintly carrying her scent, and realized I had become a guest in the life I built. Not even a guest, a ghost. The next morning, I opened the fridge to find a sticky note on my leftover casserole. "Too salty. Please label if you're keeping." I stared at it for a long time, wondering if they even realized how cruel that note was, wondering if they cared. I walked to the porch and sat in silence. The fog hung heavy over the bay. It was the kind of morning that made everything feel suspended in time. I thought about Miriam again. Her laugh, her hands in the garden. The way she'd defend me even when I didn't deserve it. I reached into my robe pocket and pulled out her photo, looked into her eyes and said aloud, "They're trying to erase me, Miriam, bit by bit. They're scraping away the man you married until there's nothing left but space for their things." And that's when I knew something had to change. Not tomorrow, not later, now. Because if I waited any longer, I wouldn't just lose my home. I'd lose myself. They had claimed it like it was nothing, like it was just another room. But that bedroom, that wasn't just where I slept. It was where Miriam and I built an entire life, where we whispered through quiet nights, where we prayed for Ingram's recovery after the car accident in '97, where she held my hand when the biopsy came back benign, and where I held hers when it didn't. It was where I watched her drift away, one breath at a time, still smiling like the storm couldn't touch her. Now it smelled like coconut lotion and hairspray. Beatrix had replaced the bedding with a cold white duvet. The floral curtains Miriam had sewn by hand were gone, replaced by gray blackout panels. Even the photo frame we kept by the lamp, the one with us standing outside the Eiffel Tower, cheeks red from the wind, had vanished. I found it in the closet behind a shoebox full of scarves. Face down. The first time I stepped back into that room after they moved in, I stood in the doorway for a full minute, frozen. Beatrix was fluffing pillows like she owned the air between the walls. "Obadiah," she said without turning, "would you mind not coming in when I'm organizing?" I didn't reply. I just scanned the room. Miriam's jewelry box had been moved. The music box on her dresser, the one that played Moon River, was gone. "Where's the music box?" I asked. "It didn't work," she said, finally turning to face me. "It was old. The hinge was broken." "I know," I said. "I fixed that hinge 4 times. It always needed a little help." Her expression didn't change. "I donated it. Someone else can give it a second life." It was in that moment I realized they weren't just erasing me. They were erasing her. Erasing us, like we were just placeholders for the decor they really wanted. Later that day, I climbed the stairs when the house was quiet. Ingram and the kids had gone out. Beatrix was in the backyard on a call. I stood at the bedroom threshold again, hand on the frame. The dresser still had Miriam's old scent, lavender and sandalwood. I opened the drawer. Empty. Not even the sachet she kept there remained. Her scarves, the letters she wrote me in our early years, even the tiny bottle of perfume she wore on our wedding day, all gone. I searched the hallway closet, the garage, even the attic. Nothing. It was as if Miriam had never existed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the narrow guest bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to recall every detail I could. The sound of her laugh when she read recipes out loud in a French accent. The way her hair curled slightly above her ear when she fell asleep reading. The way she always made the bed, smooth, with the pillows fluffed just so. I was terrified that if I didn't remember it all now, they'd take those things too. Around midnight, I got up, walked to the bedroom door. It was slightly ajar. The lamp inside cast soft shadows. I pushed it open and stepped in like a thief. The closet light was on. I reached for the shoebox where I'd seen the Eiffel Tower photo. It was gone now, just silk scarves folded with mechanical care. I sat on the edge of the bed, my side. The springs still remembered me. I looked at the wall across from me. Miriam used to keep a framed poem there. Grow old with me, the best is yet to be. She read it every night. Sometimes she'd say it aloud, especially in her final months. That frame too had disappeared. I swallowed hard. It wasn't about things. It was about memory, about the spaces that held us. And those spaces were vanishing. The next morning I asked Beatrix where the poem was. She was trimming basil at the windowsill, humming some tune I didn't recognize. Oh, that little framed verse? It didn't match the theme. I replaced it with an abstract print, something more modern. I nodded slowly. And what about the jewelry box? Obadiah, she said, sighing now, we're just trying to make the space livable. You can't keep living in the past. I leaned against the counter, staring at her. That room was my past, but it was also my only home. She didn't flinch. And now it's our home too. You said we could stay. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. That was it. The line had been crossed. They weren't temporary guests anymore. They were settlers. And I was the old landmark, nice for history, inconvenient for progress. I said nothing, just walked outside. The fog had lifted slightly. The tide was low. I sat on the bench Miriam loved, the one facing the bay. I ran my fingers over the initials we carved into the armrest. O&M, 1985. It was all still there, the house, the land, the bay. But without Miriam, and with them inside, it was no longer sacred. It was occupied. And now I understood what had to happen next. The living room used to be where Miriam and I hosted our closest friends for tea, where we played cards on Sunday nights, and where we sat by the fire, listening to radio dramas long after the television became the norm. It was a room made for warmth, for memory, for laughter. Now it echoed with voices I didn't recognize, and silences that no longer welcomed me. My chair was gone. The rug she picked out from the artisan market in Santa Fe was rolled up and replaced with a gray one that looked like it belonged in a waiting room. The paintings she adored were boxed away. Instead, abstract prints hung crookedly on the walls, loud and meaningless. Beatrix hosted book club in that room every other Thursday. Not a real book club, mind you. I doubt any of them read the books. They drank Pinot Grigio, gossiped about neighbors I'd known for 40 years, and spoke loudly enough for me to hear through the vents. I'd sit upstairs in what was once the study, now my cramped guest room, pretending not to exist. Once, I came down to grab my pipe from the drawer. The conversation froze like I'd interrupted some sacred ritual. Beatrix didn't ask what I needed. She just gave me a tight-lipped smile and returned to her guests with the words, "He still likes to peek in." They laughed. I retreated without the pipe. That room became a theater for everything I didn't belong to. Terrence played video games on the big screen, his feet on the coffee table, wrappers and soda cans accumulating on coasters Miriam had crocheted herself. When I asked him once to lift his feet, he smirked. "It's just a table, Grandpa." When I reminded him who bought that table in 1991 and why Miriam had picked it out, he shrugged. "It's just furniture. Chill." I began to time my days around when the living room was empty. Early mornings before they woke, or late evenings when they were out. I'd sneak in, sit on the edge of the couch, not my couch, just the couch now, and stare at the fireplace, trying to remember how it felt when she was here, and this space felt like sanctuary. But the silence had changed. It wasn't comforting anymore. It was heavy, watchful, like the house itself was unsure who it belonged to. Once, I heard Beatrix on a Zoom call, sitting in the living room. "Yes, it's a lovely space," she said. "Rustic bones but updated feel. We'll be redoing the built-ins soon. They're a bit dated." I stood just out of frame, unseen in the hallway, listening. That was the moment I understood what this really was. I wasn't just being pushed out emotionally. They were preparing to push me out physically. One afternoon, I came downstairs and saw them all. Ingram, Beatrix, Terence, and Alwyn spread across the room like they owned it. Watching a reality show, laughing, commenting, legs stretched out. My legs used to stretch across that same ottoman. I stood there for a moment, waiting for someone to notice. No one did. I cleared my throat. Nothing. I stepped forward. "I'd like to watch the 6 o'clock news," I said. Ingram finally looked up. "Can you give us a bit? We're in the middle of an episode." I blinked. "It's the news, Ingram. I always watch the news at 6. He looked at me like I was a child asking to stay up late. "You can stream it on your tablet." I walked away. Not because I wanted to, but because I knew if I stayed, I'd say something that couldn't be unsaid. Later that night, I sat in the laundry room on a wooden stool, streaming the news from my phone in the dim yellow light. There was nowhere else to go. The hum of the dryer filled the silence Miriam used to occupy. I watched the weather report like it mattered. Rain was coming. Always was. That weekend they held a small gathering, Beatrix's words, in the living room. 15 people, music, catered appetizers, wine glasses clinking, perfume filling every corner. I wasn't invited. I wasn't even warned. Just came downstairs to grab a glass of water and found a crowd of strangers standing where Miriam and I used to dance on New Year's Eve. One of them smiled at me like I was the hired help. "Do you live here?" she asked, voice light with champagne. I nodded. "I used to." She laughed like it was a joke. I didn't correct her. I walked outside into the cold and sat on the porch with my coat still buttoned, listening to the muffled sound of music and clinking glasses. I stared out at the bay and realized something gutting. I wasn't angry anymore. I was numb. The living room, once the heart of our home, was now just a stage where I played the role of someone forgotten. I was no longer being pushed out. I was already gone. It started with a letter I never saw. A single envelope, probably cream-colored, possibly addressed in Beatrix's handwriting, because she always insisted on doing the paperwork. I wouldn't have known anything if not for a slip of tongue, or maybe conscience, from Alwyn. We were both in the kitchen one evening, the others gone for groceries. She was scrolling on her phone. I was boiling water for tea. "You know," she said, not looking up, "Mom says it's good that the house is finally under one name. Makes taxes easier." I stopped mid-pour. "What do you mean, under one name?" She blinked at me. "Oh, nothing. I think I misunderstood." She stood up quickly and disappeared upstairs before I could ask another question. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, heart pounding. Under one name? Whose name? My name had been on the deed since 1985. I paid off the mortgage by 2002. Miriam and I had no debts. We kept the house clean, both financially and emotionally. I hadn't signed anything, not knowingly. But doubt crept in like a leak in the roof. Silent, constant, cold. The next morning, I asked Ingram directly. "Alwyn said something strange yesterday," I said, stirring my oatmeal. "She said the house is under one name now. What did she mean?" Ingram didn't look up from his phone. "Oh, that. It's just paperwork, Dad. You know how things are these days. Liabilities, taxes, estate stuff. We're just protecting you. If something ever happened, God forbid, you wouldn't want the house tangled in probate." "I didn't sign anything." "You must have," he said casually. "Back in March, remember that stack of documents Beatrix gave you? There was a durable power of attorney and some property papers. We walked you through it." I remembered the stack, but it was tax season. They said it was standard filing. I hadn't read through every page. My vision's not what it used to be. Beatrix had pointed where to sign. "Just here and here, Obadiah," she had said. "We'll handle the rest." I felt sick. They didn't yell, they didn't threaten, they didn't storm in with lawyers. They just moved the pieces when I wasn't looking. That was the betrayal. Quiet, administrative, drenched in the language of care. But sharp enough to cut a man's name off his own front door. I went into the attic that afternoon. Miriam and I kept old files in a cedar chest up there. Deeds, tax forms, documents from the county office. I dug through yellowed folders until I found the original title. Our names, side by side. The house was ours. Had been for decades. But when I compared it to the envelope of updated papers Beatrix handed me weeks ago, I found a copy of the new deed. And there it was. Owner, Ingram Lamb. No and, no joint. Just him. I stood there staring at it while dust swirled in the beam of attic light. My knees weakened. I sank onto the floorboards. It wasn't just the name, it was what it meant. Legally, I had no say. Emotionally, I had no footing. If Ingram decided to sell tomorrow, I couldn't stop him. If Beatrix decided I no longer fit their vision for the space, I had no legal claim. In the eyes of the law, I was a guest, a relic, a man borrowing time in his own home. That night at dinner, no one said a word. Terence chewed with his headphones in. Alwyn poked at her salad. Beatrix commented on the latest episode of some show I'd never watched. Ingram asked if I needed anything at the pharmacy. It was normal, pleasant even, but everything had changed. I excused myself early and stepped outside. The wind had picked up. The bay churned with the tide. I looked up at the house. 2 stories of memories now held hostage by people who called me family, but treated me like furniture left behind after an estate sale. I lit my pipe and sat on the back steps. Thought about Miriam, thought about the promises we made, how we swore we'd never let the house become a battleground. And now here I was, losing ground without a single shot fired. I wasn't sure what I'd do next, but I knew this. They had taken something from me, not just brick and wood, not just paperwork and signatures. They took trust, and they did it with smiles and polite words. That was the cruelest part. And something inside me began to harden. It happened on a quiet Tuesday. No raised voices, no slamming doors. Just calm words and eyes that avoided mine. I had just finished trimming the hedge out front, trying to keep up the routines that gave me purpose. My back ached, but at least the house still felt like something I could shape with my hands. That feeling ended the moment I stepped inside. There they were. Ingram, Beatrix, Terence, and Alwyn, lined up like they were holding court in my own living room. Beatrix was the first to speak. "Obadiah, we've been talking, and we think it might be time you had a break." I squinted at her. A break from what? She tilted her head with that same insincere softness she always used when she wanted something. From all this, the house, the stress, the stairs, the noise, we found a lovely senior community. It's temporary, of course, just until things feel more manageable. They've got lake views, movie nights, chef-prepared meals. Doesn't that sound nice? I turned to Ingram. "You're really doing this?" He exhaled like I was the difficult one. "Dad, we're just trying to help. You've said yourself the house feels crowded. It's not the same without Mom. We thought you'd appreciate the space." And if I say no? That was when the last card was played. Beatrix's smile didn't even flicker. "Then we'll have to insist. The house is in Ingram's name now. We're trying to handle this with dignity. Please don't make it harder than it needs to be." There it was, not an argument, not a request, a verdict dressed in false concern. They'd already moved the furniture of ownership. I was just the final box to remove. That night, I packed with hands that trembled more from insult than age. My room was small, and my suitcase even smaller. I folded what I could and left the rest. "We'll ship it later," they said, like it was nothing. I didn't ask what they meant by the rest. I just folded the shirts Miriam had once pressed for me, closed the case, and zipped up my life. Before I left, I walked the house like a ghost. I ran my fingers along the banister I refinished in '92, paused at the fireplace where Miriam once fell asleep in my arms, and stepped through the hallway where she used to hum while dusting picture frames. None of it felt mine anymore. I was a stranger trespassing in memories. The facility was called Pine Grove, a quaint name with artificial warmth. It was on the edge of town, past the railroad tracks, surrounded by trees that looked tired of pretending they were beautiful. My room had a single bed, a narrow window, and the faint smell of antiseptic that no amount of flowers could cover. They gave me a welcome packet and a laminated schedule, bingo nights, movie viewings, and chair yoga. I nodded like I was new at school. That first night I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, shoes still on, staring at a ceiling fan that spun with no conviction. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just blank. Like the world had pressed pause and forgotten to start again. They didn't visit that week or the next. I called. Ingram said they were adjusting to the new dynamic. Beatrix said she'd swing by soon. Terrence didn't respond. Alwyn sent a thumbs-up emoji. No one mentioned coming back for me. The nurses at Pine Grove were kind in the way professionals are taught to be. Smiles practiced, voices always just a bit too cheerful. They called me Mr. Lamb and asked if I needed help walking. I didn't, but I thanked them anyway. I walked the hallways late at night with my hands clasped behind my back, just like I used to on my porch. Except now, there was no ocean breeze, no scent of pine and salt, just recycled air and silence. One evening I sat in the common room reading an old newspaper when a nurse walked by and asked, "You settling in okay?" I didn't even look up. "Do I have a choice?" She gave me a tired smile and walked away. It was in that moment I truly understood. I hadn't been temporarily relocated. I'd been erased. Relocated sounds like care. This was exile. They wanted my absence. They wanted my house without my presence, my legacy without my shadow. And they had no intention of reversing it. The phrasing had been deliberate, just a break, for your comfort, until things settle. But it was a quiet eviction wrapped in silk. They hadn't set me away because I was frail. They set me away because I was inconvenient. But what they didn't realize, what they never accounted for, was that a man like me doesn't go quietly. I had been pushed out, yes. But that was their mistake. Because now I had nothing to lose, and nothing sharpens the mind quite like betrayal. The walls at Pine Grove were too clean, too quiet, too beige. Everything about the place whispered, "You're safe now," but in the way a cage reassures a bird that it won't fall. My room had one narrow window facing a dying tree, and a shelf just wide enough for the 3 framed photos I brought with me. Miriam on the boardwalk in '91, our old hound Samson snoozing under the bay window, and the house, the one they took from me, lit up during our 40th anniversary. Mornings were the same, lukewarm coffee in paper cups, polite nods from other residents, and announcements over the intercom that sounded too cheerful to be real. "Good morning, residents. Don't forget chair yoga in the sunroom at 10. No one rushed. No one protested. We just moved, slowly and carefully, like ghosts learning to walk in a new house. The nurses smiled like they were on a game show. Their eyes, though, told the truth. They'd seen too many arrivals and too few returns. I kept to myself mostly. Played chess with Mr. Hollis on Tuesdays, even though he forgot the rules half the time. I listened to Ella from down the hall hum old jazz tunes while watering plants that never grew. I ate my meals in silence, always facing the window. I didn't speak much, but I observed. I watched the staff, noted which residents got mail and which ones didn't. I memorized the shift changes. I tracked every visit, every phone call, every forgotten birthday cake left untouched in the fridge. Not because I wanted to escape, but because this wasn't a retirement. This was exile. And you don't survive exile by sleeping through it. Once a week I called Ingram. He rarely picked up. When he did, it was quick, polite, distant. "Hey Dad? Yeah, we're good. House is good. Kids are busy. Beatrix sends love." I'd ask if they needed anything from me. He'd laugh. "Nope, you just relax." Relax. That's what they called it. Relaxing. Meanwhile, the only thing that felt alive inside me was the part that refused to die. The part that still knew I wasn't done yet. The staff gave me a visitor badge once. I kept it. Not because I expected visitors, but because I liked what it symbolized. That someone, somewhere, was supposed to see me. Supposed to remember. But no one came. Not once. Holidays passed. Birthdays passed. The house on Henlopen Acres stayed silent. Not even a postcard. And still, I didn't complain. I didn't make a scene. I waited. A man who's lost everything is often mistaken for someone who has nothing left. That's a mistake my son was already making. One morning I found a copy of the local newspaper in the common room, folded open to the real estate section. And there it was, my house, my home. The listing didn't say Obadiah's Bayfront Gem. It said newly transferred ownership, ready for modern living. 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath, ocean view, custom-built deck. Asking price, $1.4 million. My name was gone, my history erased with a keystroke. That's when something changed. I didn't get angry. Anger's loud and wasteful. I got precise. I began writing down names, staff, schedules, delivery vendors. I learned who the facility manager was and when she left the office. I started saving my breakfast apples and trading them for favors, extra internet time, copies of outgoing mail logs, anything that passed through the admin desk. I wasn't plotting revenge out of rage. I was planning it out of principle. If they thought I was going to fade into this beige hallway with crossword puzzles and sponge cake, they didn't know who they'd messed with. People say you can't start over at 77. I say that's exactly when you should. When you've lived long enough to know what matters and what doesn't. When you've lost just enough to stop fearing loss. When you've learned that the quiet man in the corner might just be the one writing the ending no one expects. I took out a sheet of paper that evening and wrote a name I hadn't spoken aloud in years. Ferris Holcomb. He owed me a favor. I hadn't seen Ferris Holcomb in over 20 years, but some men don't fade. They sharpen with distance. We met in '84 working maritime security, both of us too stubborn for the chain of command and too observant for our own good. Ferris was quiet, calculating, and loyal in the way that made dangerous men nervous. Last I'd heard, he left the docks for consulting work with a private firm, code for handling situations discreetly. That was a lifetime ago. But when the walls of Pine Grove have started to close in and the last photos of Miriam stared back at me like old ghosts, I knew who to call. It took me 3 days to get the facility's tech volunteer to let me use the computer. I bribed her with a slice of cafeteria peach cobbler I didn't even touch. One outdated website, 2 dead-end phone numbers, and an obscure boating registry later, I found a Charleston contact listing buried in a forum. F. Holcomb, Asset Solutions. I picked up the landline in my room and dialed. Holcomb, came the voice. Gravel, steady, no trace of surprise. It's Obadiah, I said. Obadiah Lamb. Silence, then a low whistle. Still breathing? Barely, I replied. They kicked me out, Ferris, took the house, changed the deed, dumped me in this place like I was a broken chair. Another pause. You want it back? I want the upper hand. Address? Pine Grove Retirement, room 203. I'll be there tomorrow, he said and hung up. He arrived the next morning in a long leather coat, his gait the same, methodical, cautious, like a man who still checked every room for exits. We sat in the one quiet spot behind the building, a tired patio with a half-dead tree. I didn't waste time. I told him about Ingram, about Beatrix, about the strangers walking barefoot through my living room. Ferris listened with the same quiet intensity I remembered, taking in every word without blinking. When I was done, he nodded slowly and said, "Clean revenge?" "Strategic," I answered. "No courtroom drama, no public scene, just something they'll never see coming." Ferris scratched his beard. "We'll need access to the property. There's still a key hidden behind the garden wall, 3rd stone from the left. They never found it." "Perfect. And Delilah Cross, remember her? The freight case lawyer? Tough as nails, she's still around? Practicing privately, owes me a favor, she'll draw up whatever we need." Ferris pulled out a burner phone and slid it across the table. "Use this, don't touch the landline again, too many eyes." Then came a manila folder. Inside, profiles, financials, pre-approval letters. "Meet Michael and Renee," Ferris said. "Married. No kids, retired from Baltimore, looking for coastal property." I told them I had a listing that hadn't hit the market yet. I stared at the folder. "You're selling them my house?" "Not yet. But if they like it, we make a quiet offer. Cash forward, no contingencies. Delilah handles the paperwork. No one knows you're involved until it's too late." "And if Ingram agrees?" "He will. People like him always sell when they think they're in control. But by the time he sees what happened, the deed will be signed, the sale will be final, and he'll have to live with the fact that the man he cast out just flipped the game on him." I sat back, letting the weight of it settle in my bones. For the first time in weeks, I felt awake. Not angry, not bitter, just clear. Ferris stood, pulling his coat tight. "Give me 5 days. Stay invisible. Let them think you faded. Meanwhile, I'll be making your presence felt in all the right places." "You're sure about these buyers?" I asked. He turned and smiled. "They don't care who owned it before. They just want the view. That's what makes this perfect." After he left, I stared at the burner phone in my palm, then at the folder tucked beside it. There was no thrill in my chest, no adrenaline rush, just quiet resolve. The kind of stillness a man finds when he stops hoping for justice and starts delivering it. They had erased me from my own life. Ferris had just handed me the pen. The plan moved fast. That was Ferris's style. By the end of the week, he had spoken with Horace Dunham, met twice with Thornton and Phoebe Barrington, and walked the perimeter of the house at dusk, like a general scouting familiar terrain. I stayed back, playing my role at Pine Grove, smiling at nurses, nodding through bingo announcements, quietly waiting for the game to unfold. Ferris came to see me late one evening with a look that said things were in motion. "The buyers love the place," he said. "They've toured twice, once during the day and once after hours. They even saw your garden. Said it smells like memory," he smirked. "They're ready to make an offer." I sat up straighter. "And Ingram?" "He has no clue," Ferris replied. "As far as he knows, it's just a private inquiry that came in through the listing. No agents, no middlemen, just a high-net buyer looking for a fast transaction." "And Horace?" "He's drawing up the paperwork now. I've already looped in the notary, the title office, and 2 property inspectors. Everything checks out. We'll have the contracts ready in 48 hours. There was a quiet moment where I just nodded, letting it all sink in. The house that was taken from me would soon be in the hands of strangers. But this time, it wouldn't feel like theft. It would feel like justice. "Will they meet him?" I asked. "Phoebe insisted," Ferris said. "Wants to walk the property with the owner? But don't worry. Horace is setting up the meeting on neutral ground. We've coached them on exactly what to say. Ingram will think he's orchestrating the deal. He'll feel powerful, necessary. It's exactly the blind spot we need." I smiled. He always did love being the smartest person in the room. Ferris leaned forward, "And he won't see it coming until it's over." 2 days later, the offer was made. Full price, cash, no inspections, no demands. Just a clean deal with a 30-day close. I imagined Ingram opening that email, his pride swelling at the thought of an effortless sale. Proof that his decision to toss me aside was somehow profitable. Beatrix likely celebrated in her quiet, smug way, another item on her spreadsheet neatly resolved. But what they didn't realize was that the very signatures they were preparing to place on those documents were the beginning of the unraveling. Because once the papers were signed, Ferris would activate the final piece of the plan. A notification clause buried in the contract, a quiet trigger that allowed for the former occupant to be granted access for retrieval of personal heirlooms. A clause Ingram never even noticed, because Horace made sure it was wrapped in legalese, hidden between boilerplate lines. It was more than a clause. It was my key back into the house. The closing day was scheduled. The Barringtons sent their deposit. The title company began processing the transfer. And all the while, Ingram walked around with that arrogant bounce in his step, the kind that made you want to remind him of who raised him. Ferris kept me updated with short, direct calls. Horace handled everything with precision and quiet fury. And me? I sat on the edge of my bed at Pine Grove every night, holding Miriam's old rosary in my hands, not because I prayed, but because it reminded me what dignity used to feel like. I wasn't after vengeance that scorched. I was after clarity that stung. The morning of the final walkthrough, Ferris and I met in the church parking lot across from the house. I wore my best coat. He handed me a folded document and a pair of tees. "Today," he said, "you go in like a man who never left, and they're about to learn what it feels like to be the ones on the outside." I took a deep breath. "Are the buyers in place?" "Waiting inside," he confirmed. "They're in love with the kitchen. Said it reminds them of their grandmother's place. Ingram will be there in 20 minutes. Beatrix too. Everyone's playing their part. Once they sign, we'll file the transfer. And then, you step in." I stood there for a second longer, then crossed the street. My legs felt steady. My breath was calm. The wind from the bay brushed against my face like a greeting. I walked through the open gate, past the roses I had planted for Miriam, past the porch rail I had repaired 3 times, past the window where I used to sit and read the paper. When I entered the house, Thornton and Phoebe turned to face me. "You must be Obadiah," Phoebe said gently. "I am," I replied. "Thank you for seeing the beauty in this place." Thornton smiled. "We don't just see it, we feel it. This house has a soul." I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Then footsteps on the gravel outside caught my attention. Ingram's voice, laughing about something trivial. Beatrix trailing behind, her eyes scanning everything like she owned it. They walked in, all pleasantries and performance, and for a few seconds, no one said anything. Then Ferris walked in behind them and handed over the final contract for signing. And just like that, without ceremony or struggle, the house that was once mine passed through their hands and into the hands of people who respected it more than they ever could. And me? I stepped out of the shadows, rosary in my pocket, key in hand. The final move was in motion. The moment the offer was signed, the ripple effect began. Ingram didn't celebrate with anyone. He announced the deal to the family like he'd won a silent war no one else had known was happening. Private buyer, full cash offer, 30-day close, he told Beatrix at dinner. I must have priced it just right. She nodded like she was proud of him, but it was the kind of pride that came with numbers, not love. Alwyn barely looked up from her phone. Terrence grunted something about how weird it would be not having a base anymore. They were already detaching. That night, I imagined them sitting in that living room, the one I used to call mine, talking about the sale like it was a smart investment move rather than a betrayal carved into wood and tile. They didn't ask where I would go, what would happen to my belongings, or what became of the memories. To them, the sale wasn't the end of a legacy. It was a clean slate with equity attached. What they didn't know was that Thornton and Phoebe Barrington weren't just any buyers. They were the kind of people who read the fine print, who understood the soul of a place before the square footage. Thornton, a retired historian, had walked through the house like it was a chapter of American resilience. Phoebe, a former preservationist, had said she could feel the breath of the past in the walls. They weren't just buying a house. They were stepping into a story, and they wanted to honor it. Ferris told me how carefully Horace Dunham had coordinated the legal veil. Everything on paper looked normal. An eager buyer, a well-priced property, a straightforward deal. But behind the scenes, every move was engineered to protect one thing: my rightful place. Horace made sure the clause about return access for heirloom retrieval would be ironclad. No court would challenge it, no signature would undo it. The Barringtons were briefed thoroughly. They knew how Ingram might react. They knew what had been done to me. And they didn't flinch. There's a dignity that needs to be restored here, Thornton said, and we're glad to play our part in it. Ferris updated me daily. He told me how Ingram strutted around like a visionary, bragging to neighbors about how quickly he'd secured a buyer. You should have heard him on the phone, Ferris laughed. He said, they were practically begging to buy it. I must have inherited your knack for property timing, Dad. I didn't respond. I just stared at the wall in my small Pine Grove room. My fingers curled around the edge of the blanket, wondering how long it would take for him to realize what he'd really sold. The day the Barringtons requested a formal sit-down to walk through some sentimental features of the home, Ingram was flattered. They're obsessed with the architecture, he told Ferris. Especially that old rocking chair nook on the second floor. You believe that? It's just a corner, but they want to hear about its history. He rolled his eyes and puffed out his chest. People love a story, I guess. He had no idea that the story they were hearing wasn't his. At that sit-down, Phoebe asked about the marks on the kitchen door frame. They look like measurement lines. Was someone keeping track of height over the years? Ingram blinked. Yeah, probably my dad. He was into that kind of stuff. Thornton leaned in. And the garden, those roses. Any particular reason they were planted in that arrangement? Ingram shrugged. They were there when I got here. That's when Phoebe smiled politely and said, we figured as much. Ferris told me the couple handled themselves with elegance and subtle defiance. They weren't confrontational. They simply asked questions that made Ingram shrink by the minute. It became clearer to him with each detail. He hadn't created this home. He'd inherited it like a stranger inheriting someone else's suit, and now he was selling it with the same detachment. Later that week, Beatrix grew suspicious. Why don't they have an agent? She asked Ingram. Why aren't they asking for any credits or repairs? Ingram brushed her off. They're loaded. They just want the house. Some people don't need drama. She looked unconvinced. But it was too late. The title company had processed the deposit. Horace had filed the necessary documents. Thornton and Phoebe had scheduled the final walkthrough, and Ferris had already packed a duffel bag with my essentials. We were moving quietly, not with rage, with orchestration. By the time the neighbors began whispering, "Did you hear who bought the lamb place?" Ingram had already begun shifting his focus. "We'll find something more modern," he told Beatrix. "That place is old. This is a step up." But deep down, I think he felt the pull of something he couldn't name. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was shame, or maybe it was the hollow echo that fills a man's chest when he realizes he's sold something money can't buy back. Back at Pine Grove, I sat on the bench near the East Garden, watching the sun stretch across the sidewalk. Ferris handed me a manila envelope with my copy of the contract. "He has no idea what he gave away," he said, "and no clue what's coming." I opened the envelope slowly, like unsealing a piece of my own history. Inside, it wasn't just paper. It was power, quiet, patient, and almost poetic. The revenge wasn't loud, but it was already landing. The idea came from Ferris. "You want the final act to be seen," he said, "not just felt. This isn't about private satisfaction anymore, Obadiah. This is about reclaiming your dignity in public." I leaned back on the bench at Pine Grove, considering it. The paperwork had been filed. The Barringtons were days away from officially taking ownership. Everything was moving behind the scenes. But Ferris was right. What they'd done to me had been visible. So the justice should be visible too. "Terrence's birthday is next week," I said quietly. Ferris raised an eyebrow. "They're throwing him a party in the house," I nodded. "Every year since he turned 12. He'll be 18 this time. Big number. There will be decorations, food, neighbors. They'll want to show off the place before they move." Ferris smirked. "Perfect." From there, he got to work. Horace Dunham made a few subtle calls to finalize the post-closing access clause. It would go into effect exactly 48 hours before the official handoff to Thornton and Phoebe. That window, Horace explained, would give me lawful access to retrieve sentimental heirlooms and oversee any handover details. On paper, it was business. But emotionally, it was the door I needed to walk back into my life. The Barringtons, ever gracious, agreed to stay away that weekend. "Let them have their little celebration," Phoebe had said on the phone. "We'll wait. Besides, we trust Obadiah to make the reintroduction memorable." The morning of the party, I woke earlier than usual. The staff at Pine Grove noticed. One of the aides brought me coffee without me asking. "You look sharp today, Mr. Lamb," she said. "Got something special planned?" I just smiled. I hadn't told anyone, not even the kind nurse who sometimes played hymns in the common room to lift spirits. This wasn't a day for sharing. It was a day for settling. Ferris picked me up in a black Lincoln, rented for the occasion. Not flashy, just formal enough to feel deliberate. I wore my old gray suit, the one I'd worn to Miriam's funeral, freshly pressed and fitted. Around my wrist I clasped her silver bracelet, now dull from time, but still warm with memory. As we approached the street, I could see the cluster of cars parked outside the house. Balloons were tied to the front gate. A banner stretched across the porch. "Happy 18th, Terrence." I watched from a distance as Ingram stood by the grill, laughing too loudly. Beatrix hovered with a tray of deviled eggs, fussing with details like she was hosting the neighborhood's most elegant farewell. Alwyn was, as usual, glued to her phone, barely noticing the world around her. We waited for the moment Ferris had planned, when enough guests were inside, when the living room was full, when the music was loud enough, the wine flowing enough, the small talk thick enough that the last thing they expected was me. I stepped out of the car slowly. Ferris walked beside me, briefcase in hand. We moved through the gate without pause, crossed the yard and climbed the front steps. No one noticed right away. Not until I opened the front door, my door, and stepped inside the house I had built with Miriam, brick by brick. It was Terrence who saw me first. His smile faltered mid-sentence. "Grandpa?" he said, confused. Several heads turned. The room fell silent. Ingram turned from the stereo. His face froze. Beatrix's tray tilted slightly in her hand. I looked around slowly, my gaze deliberate. "Good afternoon," I said, voice steady. "I'm here under Clause 17 of the signed contract between Thornton and Phoebe Barrington and Ingram and Beatrix Lamb. Authorized by Horace Dunham Esky. I have access to the property this weekend." No one spoke. Ferris opened his briefcase, handed a copy of the document to Ingram. "All legal," he said simply, "signed, filed, and enforceable." Ingram scanned the first page, his lips moved, eyes darting. "You, Sold it? I stepped forward. Yes, to buyers who understand what this house meant, who don't erase names from photo frames, who don't convert legacy into profit. Alwyn stepped back. Terence just stood there, frozen, trying to process it all. Beatrix was the first to break the silence. You timed this on his birthday? Ferris didn't flinch. You made this house a battlefield. You don't get to be surprised when someone brings a flag. I walked through the living room slowly, letting my fingers trail the furniture they hadn't changed. The same couch I had picked with Miriam, the same clock that still ticked like it was counting down a secret. I reached the kitchen doorway, paused and turned back. Continue your party, I said. It's your last one here. Then I walked upstairs alone to retrieve what mattered. I stood at the top of the stairs, just outside the bedroom Miriam and I once shared. I could still hear the soft noise of the party below. Forks clinking against porcelain, hushed voices trying to recover normalcy. But the tension was thick, like the walls themselves knew something irreversible had happened. I stepped into the room, closed the door behind me, and let the silence wrap around me like an old friend. Everything was as I had left it before being exiled, except now it wasn't mine in theory. It was mine in fact, and they didn't even realize the depth of what that meant yet. On the nightstand, the photo of Miriam still sat face down, exactly how Beatrix had left it. I picked it up and turned it over. Miriam's smile beamed from behind the dusty glass. We're back, darling, I whispered, and this time, we're not leaving. Downstairs, Ferris was calmly laying out documents on the dining table. Horace Dunham stood beside him in a dark suit, quietly dignified, his briefcase open like a surgeon's tray before an operation. Thornton and Phoebe Barrington entered next, with the calm poise of people who knew they belonged, even if no one else had caught up yet. Beatrix's eyes narrowed at them, while Ingram stood stiff with the papers still trembling in his hand. This isn't just a sale, Ferris said to the stunned room. It's a complete and legal transfer of ownership. Mr. Thornton and Mrs. Phoebe Barrington are now the rightful owners of this property. The deed is filed. The funds have cleared. The house, he tapped the paper, is theirs. Terence muttered, "Wait, what?" While Alwyn finally looked up from her phone, brow furrowed. Beatrix was the first to speak. "You sold it behind our backs," she barked at Ingram. "Without telling me?" Ingram's voice cracked. "I didn't sell it to them." He waved the document. "I sold it to someone else, a different name. There must be." "No mistake," Horace cut in gently but firmly. "The buyers used a holding company, which they are legally allowed to do, and that holding company belonged to Thornton and Phoebe Barrington. The transfer is clean, final, and irreversible." The room began to shift. Guests, who just moments earlier were drinking wine and taking photos, were now awkwardly standing near the walls, unsure whether to excuse themselves or stay and witness the fallout. The energy had changed, and the birthday banner above the mantel now looked like a punchline. I descended the stairs slowly, and as my feet met the floor, every eye turned to me. I walked past the couch, past the bookshelf, past the very spot where Beatrix had once asked me not to sit because it made the room feel crowded. And I stopped at the dining table, beside Ferris. "I didn't come to embarrass you," I said. "I came to reclaim what was mine. You may have pushed me out, erased me from rooms I built, treated me like I was just another old man with too many memories and too little power. But you forgot one thing." I opened a manila folder and removed a faded photograph, a picture of this house back in the 80s, right after Miriam and I bought it. We were standing on the porch with paint rollers in our hands, our smiles bright, the front door still a raw slab of pine before the red stain had even dried. "This house never belonged to you," I continued. "You were living in borrowed history, and now that history is correcting itself." Thornton nodded toward Horace, who then slid over a set of keys. "These are yours, Mr. Lamb. You'll have full access until the Barringtons move in next week. Per their request, you may remain during that time to retrieve anything you wish, or simply be home." Ingram's face had drained to pale white. "You set me up," he whispered, more to himself than anyone. "You had this planned." "I gave you chance after chance," I replied calmly. "All I ever wanted was respect, dignity, a place to age with grace, but you chose cruelty, you chose profit, and so I chose justice." Beatrix's voice rose again. "You humiliated us in front of the neighborhood. Phoebe stepped forward, finally speaking. You humiliated yourselves when you forgot that houses hold memories, that roots matter. You can't just wipe that clean and expect it not to push back. Even the guests had stopped pretending this was still a party. They now stared at Ingram and Beatrix like strangers at a train wreck, morbidly curious, slightly ashamed, but unable to look away. The silence was thick with disbelief. Terence crossed his arms. So what now? He asked, eyes darting from me to his father. Now, Ferris said with a smirk, you start packing. Thornton added with perfect civility, you have 5 days, per contract terms. After that, any belongings left behind will be considered forfeited. Ingram looked at me one last time, and something in his eyes cracked. Not rage, not hate, but something deeper. The kind of ache that hits a man when he realizes he's not the hero of his own story anymore. Maybe he never was. I didn't say another word. I just turned and walked out the front door, my door, for the first time in years without feeling like a ghost. This time, I was whole. This time, I had won. The house was quiet after the party ended, like it knew something sacred had returned. For 2 days, I stayed there alone, just me and the walls that once echoed with Miriam's humming. I slept in my old bed, I made coffee in the chipped blue mug she had loved, and for the first time in years, I felt peace. But that peace didn't last. The guilt trips came quickly, first from Ingram. He called my phone 7 times in a single morning. I didn't answer. He tried text messages next. We didn't mean it like that. You didn't have to do this to us. You've ruined our family. I read each one, then put the phone down. They weren't apologies. They were accusations, dressed in desperation. On the 3rd day, he showed up in person. No appointment, no warning. Just knocked on the front door as if nothing had happened. I opened it slowly. He looked worn, less put together than usual. Maybe the weight of consequences finally touched him. Dad, he said, we need to talk. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. He wasn't coming in. He sighed, frustrated. I know you think we betrayed you, but we were just trying to give the kids a better future. Beatrix thought. I raised a hand. Don't blame her. You signed the papers. You made the decisions. He clenched his jaw. But this is extreme. You humiliated us. You blindsided your own son. No, I said. I gave you every chance. You just kept pushing, so I pushed back. Harder. His tone shifted. Softer. We're still family, Dad. Terence and Alwyn, they're confused. They're hurt. Don't you think you've done enough? I looked him in the eye. No, I think for once I've done exactly enough. He stared at the porch for a moment, then quietly said, Beatrix wants to speak to you. I shook my head. She's had my silence for years. That's all she gets. He nodded once, then turned and walked back to his car. He didn't slam the door this time. He drove off slower, like a man unsure of his next step. That afternoon, I received a letter slipped under the front door. No stamp, no envelope, just folded paper in Beatrix's careful handwriting. It started with, I never meant for this to happen, and ended with, you've turned the children against us. Not a word about Miriam. Not a word about what the house meant. Just bruised ego and blame. I folded it neatly and placed it in the trash. Later that evening, Ferris called. You holding up, Obadiah? I told him I was. He chuckled. They always try guilt last. When money fails, when control fails, guilt is the last bullet. Let it miss. I smiled faintly. Already has. But the part that surprised me most was Terence. The following morning, he showed up alone. No parents. Just him, standing on the porch with hesitant eyes and slumped shoulders. I opened the door and he didn't speak right away. Then he said, Can I come in? I let him. We sat in the living room, he on the edge of the armchair, me in the recliner Miriam once favored. For a while he didn't say much, just looked around like he was seeing the house for the first time. Mom says you manipulated the whole thing, he finally said. I waited. But I think she's just mad you didn't let them win. I studied him. What do you think happened? He rubbed his palms together. I think you finally stood up, and I didn't know you still could. There was silence between us, honest silence. Then I asked, why did you come here, Terence? He looked at me, eyes clearer than before, because I wanted to say, I get it. I see what they did, and I'm sorry. That was all, and it was enough. He stood up, lingered by the door, then added, if you ever want to have lunch, just us. I nodded. I'd like that. He left without needing anything from me. No inheritance talk, no strings. just a grandson finding his own path back to the truth. That night, I sat on the back porch watching the bay reflect the sunset. The sky shifted from gold to purple, the water calm. I thought of Miriam again, how she always believed storms revealed people's true nature. And she was right. In the end, all the noise, the guilt, the betrayal, it led me back to myself. And this time, I wasn't moving. The morning after Terrence's visit, I opened the windows wide and let the sea air pour in. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was living in someone else's house. The creaks in the floorboards, the faded wallpaper, even the smell of dust warmed by sun, they belonged to me again. No more tiptoeing around expectations. No more pretending I didn't see the glances or hear the sighs of annoyance. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels earned. I started walking the neighborhood again, slowly, cautiously. But I walked. Some neighbors waved, others stared a bit longer than usual. The gossip must have traveled fast. The old man kicked out by his family, now back with new owners in tow. I didn't care what they whispered. I was upright, breathing, and free. That was enough. Ferris called the following week. "You're not planning on becoming a recluse, are you?" he teased. "That house can't be your whole world again." I laughed. No, but I needed to feel it one more time, feel what it's like to win. He paused. Then he said, "You didn't just win, Obadiah. You took your name back. That's something most people never get to do." The next day, I met with Thornton and Phoebe Barrington for lunch. We sat at the Marina Cafe overlooking the water. They weren't just buyers anymore. They were people I respected. Phoebe brought along blueprints, plans for modest renovations. Nothing flashy, nothing disrespectful. Just fresh coats of paint, some safer railings, maybe a small garden where the patchy lawn used to be. "We want the spirit of the place to stay," she said gently. "It should still feel like someone lived here with love." Thornton added, "We know this wasn't just a sale for you. It was a reckoning." I nodded slowly, and I appreciate that you saw that. We finalized the transition dates. I would have until the end of the month to wrap things up. No rush, no pressure, just enough time to say goodbye without bitterness. I boxed up the things I cared about, Miriam's letters, old vinyl records, a worn flannel shirt I couldn't bring myself to toss. Everything else, I let go. It was easier than I expected. Like I had already released it all emotionally years ago, the day they made me feel like an inconvenience in my own home. In the evenings, I sat out on the back porch with a blanket across my knees and a thermos of tea. The gulls flew low over the water. The breeze smelled like salt and memory. Sometimes I caught myself talking to Miriam again, telling her about what had happened, about Ferris, about the lawyer Horace Dunham, and the elegant couple who bought our home. I imagined her smile, soft, proud, knowing. She would have said, "Took you long enough, Obi." With every passing day, I felt more whole. I had no illusions about starting over at 77. But I wasn't starting over. I was picking up where I left off. Before the disappointment, before the disrespect, before I allowed comfort to silence my instincts. One afternoon I took a bus out to Pine Grove, not to move back, but to visit. I found Clarice, the kind nurse who always brought me extra pudding cups, and gave her a small basket of baked goods as thanks. She hugged me and said, "You look 10 years younger." I smiled. "That's because I got my life back." She looked at me curiously. "You're glowing, Mr. Lamb. What happened?" "Freedom," I said simply. Freedom happened. On the final morning in the house, I woke up before the sun. The air was crisp with salt and quiet. I brewed one last pot of coffee and drank it on the back porch as the sky turned from navy to gold. The house was empty now, every room hollow, but not sad. Just ready. Like it understood its chapter with me had ended, and it was time for something new. I didn't feel pain, I didn't feel regret, I felt release. I took one last walk through each room. I touched the door frames Miriam once painted herself, ran my fingers across the windowsills where our cat used to nap. In the kitchen, I paused at the spot where she would dance barefoot while waiting for the kettle to sing. I didn't cry, I smiled, because this time I was choosing to leave on my own terms. Outside, Thornton and Phoebe were waiting in their car. I locked the front door and handed them the keys with a nod. No ceremony, no dramatics, just quiet understanding. "Thank you for honoring this place," I said. Thornton shook my hand firmly. "Thank you for passing it on with dignity." Phoebe hugged me gently. "We'll take care of it," she whispered. Ferris met me at the bottom of the drive, leaning against his truck. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded. More than ever. He opened the door for me, and as I climbed in, I looked back one last time. The house stood proud against the sky, not haunted, not broken, just whole, just free. We drove for miles with the windows down. The wind tangled my hair and the sun kissed my face. We didn't talk much. There wasn't much left to say. I was no longer running from anything. No longer holding on to what no longer served me. I wasn't someone's burden. I wasn't someone's silent provider. I was Obadiah Lamb, a man who had lost and found and finally reclaimed himself. Ferris helped me move into a modest two-bedroom cottage on a quiet street not far from the coast. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't large, but it was mine. There were no passive-aggressive notes on the fridge, no sideways glances when I sat too long in one chair, no locks changed behind my back, just peace. The first night in the new place, I opened all the windows and let the breeze sweep through every room. I didn't bring much with me, just memories that mattered. Miriam's flannel shirt hung behind the door. Our old photo rested on the nightstand. I placed her seashell wind chime by the window, and when the wind blew, it sounded like laughter. Days passed. I got into a rhythm. Mornings with tea and crosswords. Afternoons walking the shoreline. Evenings reading old journals, remembering who I used to be before life got complicated. Ferris stopped by often, sometimes to check in, sometimes just to share a beer in silence. He never treated me like a fragile old man. He treated me like a man who'd lived. Terence called once. "Just wanted to say I'm proud of you," he said. "I hope I grow into the kind of man who doesn't let people take him for granted." I told him he already was. Beatrix never reached out again. Neither did Ingram, and I was okay with that. Some bridges once burned reveal they were never safe to cross to begin with. I started painting again, just small things. Brushstrokes of memory on canvas, the bay at dusk, Miriam's hands in warm tones, a faded porch bathed in morning light. I wasn't painting for others. I was painting for me, for the man who had waited too long to remember himself. On my 78th birthday, Ferris brought over a chocolate cake and 2 candles. "One for the year you were born," he said, "and one for the year you came back to life." I laughed. It felt good. It felt real. Later that night, I stepped outside and looked up at the stars. The wind rustled the trees. Somewhere nearby, waves lapped gently against the shore. And in that moment, I realized something simple and beautiful. I had nothing left to prove. Not to anyone. Not even to myself. Some betrayals cut deeper than words. They don't always come from enemies, but from the very people you once shared your home, your love, and your silence with. Obadiah Lamb didn't seek revenge to hurt anyone. He did it to remember who he was, to remind the world and himself that he was never invisible, never weak, and never expendable. His story isn't just about getting even. It's about reclaiming dignity, about taking back power when the people closest to you think you'll go quietly. It's about the quiet strength that comes when you finally say no more. Now let me ask you, if you were in Obadiah's shoes, what would you have done? Would you have walked away without a word? Or would you have reminded them exactly who they were dealing with? Let us know in the comments. Your voice matters here. And if this story stirred something inside you, if it made you pause, made you clench your jaw or nod in silent agreement, then do one thing for us. Like this video so others hear it too. Share it with someone who needs to remember their worth. Subscribe to Revenge is Mine, because every week we bring you powerful stories where justice isn't begged for, it's delivered. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a twist, a turn, or a moment where the tables finally turn. Because here, revenge isn't just a story. It's a reckoning.